Hi, my name is Dominique and I'm the owner of Cedar Lily Beads. Today in this video, I'm going to show you how to make this beaded ring using the even number peyote stitch. Let's get started. Here's what you need for this project. A sharp pair of scissors, a beading needle, some thread, some beads, and I like to use this kind of fabric which is called a beading mat to prevent my beads from rolling around. This project doesn't require you to make any knots, so you can start by threading your needle. We're going to be working with an even number of beads across. So I'm going to start by picking up one of each of these beads. I want to leave a generous tail at the end so that we can weave it in afterwards. Mine is about 4 or 5 inches. And I'm going to take these beads and let them fall all the way to where I'm pinching this thread. Just like this. Now we're ready to peyote stitch. I don't want to let go of this until we have a bit built up so that the beads don't slide off. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up one extra red bead. This red bead is going to stack on top of this red bead. So I'm going to pass my needle through just the yellow bead. The beginning is the hardest, so just trying to keep your project together as best as you can. So as you can see, those two red beads end up stacking in front of each other. I'm now going to pick up a white bead. And I'm going to pass through just the black bead, pulling my needle through. So like I said, the beginning can be a little bit tricky because it might not stay flat, but that's okay. As we work, you'll see it'll all come together. So we've done row 1, which is this red bead and this white bead, row 2, which is the yellow bead and the black bead, and row 3, which is the white bead and the red bead. Now we're going to do row 4. So what's cool about peyote stitch is that it's kind of like bricklaying. So in each row we're only going to be adding 2 beads and we're kind of going to be filling in the blank. So as you can see, we're missing a black bead and a yellow bead. And since our thread is coming out of the black bead, we'll go ahead and start with the black bead. Black bead, I'm going to pass through the white bead going in this direction. I'm making sure that I'm keeping this end of the thread, the tail end, nice and tight. Now I can go ahead and pick up a yellow bead and pass through just the red bead. So you might be able to start seeing how the rows kind of stagger on top of each other. So from here, keeping that nice and tight, I'm picking up a red bead to fill in this gap that we've made right here. So with my red bead, I'm passing through the yellow bead. Next, I want to fill in the gap of this white bead here, so I'm going to pick up a white bead and pass through the black bead. So we're going to continue with this pattern of just filling in the gaps and kind of thinking about laying bricks to have this offset kind of pattern. Again, this is called peyote stitch, and it is much easier when you have an even number, which is why we're going with an even number for this project. So you're going to keep going back and forth until you have the length that you desire, which would be the length to wrap around your finger like this. One thing I didn't mention earlier is that you can make your ring as wide as you like. So I'm doing 4 beads wide, but you can make it 6 bead wide, 2 bead wide, 8 bead wide, but try to stick with even numbers. It's just a lot easier for a beginner project. So I'm going to go ahead and keep beading this ring. So I've now finished beading the length of my ring. So what I'm going to do now is you want to make sure that the last row you did which for me was black and yellow, like this. You can see those two are sticking out, is compatible with the beginning row, that first row, for me, which is white and red. So we're now going to connect these two ends together. So as you can see, they are compatible since my beginning row and my end row are the opposite. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pass my thread through the top bead of my starting row, the second bead of my last row, the third bead of my first row, and the last bead of my last row. When I pull this, they'll kind of snap into place. So as you can see, we have a pretty seamless finish. So I'm going to keep my needle on either of these threads. It doesn't really matter which one. And we're going to weave in our ends before we cut them. So what that's going to look like is just making sure that all the beads are going to stay in place. So working diagonally, I always only go through 2 beads at a time. So you never want to crisscross over beads. You kind of just want to weave it in and follow where the thread is already going. So I'm just reinforcing where we brought the 2 ends together here by passing through 2 beads at a time, but not creating any new paths for the thread. So you can do this as many times as you'd like, as long as you feel like everything's being held together. I like to use as much as my thread as I can because I don't like to waste. So I'm going to pass until I have a couple inches left. Again, try not to do more than 2 beads at a time on your needle because you don't want to break your beads. Just working my way along. This is also good to reinforce those other stitches. So your ring might be a little bit floppy, which is fine, but reinforcing some of these stitches will give it a bit more of a rigid and secured feel. Okay, so now I have a few inches left. I want to weave this in and kind of do a loop so that when I cut it, I won't be afraid that my thread's going to come undone. So one way I like to do this is pick 4 beads in the middle. So I'm going to choose this bead that my thread's coming out of here, as well as this white bead here, the white bead on top, and this yellow bead here. So what I'm going to do is, going through just 2 beads at a time again, I'm going to make a loop. So passing through maybe just 1 bead at a time since they are pretty staggered in this area. So I'm going through those 4 beads and making a loop. I'm going to go one more time. If your needle feels like it's really having a hard time going through the beads, it's because there's too much thread in your beads. So don't force it, because that's how you break a bead. So I'm pretty happy with how this feels here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this thread. If you pull a bit of tension, it'll kind of disappear into the bead. So now I just have this tail end left to weave in. So we're going to do the same thing we just did with the other thread. So going 2 beads at a time, I'm just weaving this end into the ring. So you could tell that this was the right direction to go, because as you can see on the bottom, a lot of these beads have 2 threads coming out of them, whereas in this direction where I'm going, there's only 1. You connecting the beads together. So I'm gonna do a few more going this way just to reinforce this side of the ring. And there's no real pattern or way of doing this. It's just to hide in that end. So whatever feels good, or if you feel like one bead is a little bit out of place, this would be a good time to go back through that bead and just reinforce those stitches. So my end is getting quite short, so I'm going to do the same thing again, picking these 4 beads right here, and I'm just going to pass it through those 4 beads a few times to make a loop. Once I'm happy with that, I'm gonna go ahead and cut. And there you have it, your very own beaded ring. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Follow me on socials, check out my website, do all the things. I'll put them in the description below. I have a few other tutorial videos that you might be interested in checking out. But if that's all, thanks a lot for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.